My name is James, and for the past 12 years, I've shared my life with Catherine. Our journey together has been a blend of joy and challenges, woven into a tapestry of shared experiences and deep companionship. Catherine and I met in our early 20s, and from the moment we first crossed paths, there was a spark, an undeniable connection that drew us together. We married a few years later, full of optimism and dreams for the future. Our relationship has always been built on a foundation of mutual respect and love, but like any partnership, we've faced our fair share of obstacles. We've navigated through the ebb and flow of life, career changes, moving to a new city, and the occasional disagreement. Yet each hurdle has only strengthened our bond. Catherine is a remarkable woman. Her passion for life is infectious, and her kindness extends to everyone she meets. Her dedication to her work, her interests, and our relationship is unwavering. We have built a comfortable home together, filled with warmth and laughter. Though we have our minor disagreements, like any couple does, they are just that, minor. They never seem to threaten the stability of our love or our happiness. Recently, Catherine's enthusiasm has been directed towards jazz music. It began as a casual interest, but has since grown into a significant part of her life. She immerses herself in the world of jazz, attending concerts and festivals with a fervor that is both admirable and, at times, slightly bewildering. I support her passion wholeheartedly, even if it sometimes feels like it takes her away from our everyday routines. Despite these small deviations from our normalcy, our life together has been filled with love and understanding. As I reflect on our 12 years together, I feel a deep sense of contentment and pride in the life we've built. Yet, little did I know that beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect life, some undercurrents would soon challenge everything I thought I knew about our relationship. Catherine's passion for jazz has always been one of her defining traits. From the early days of our relationship, I remember the way her eyes would light up when she spoke about her favorite musicians or a particularly memorable performance. Jazz wasn't just a genre of music to her. It was a deeply ingrained part of her soul, a source of joy and inspiration. Over the years, she's developed an impressive collection of records and has a knack for discovering hidden gems within the jazz world. Our home often reverberates with the soulful sounds of Coltrane, Davis, and Monk, creating a backdrop of smooth melodies and intricate rhythms that have become as familiar to me as the sound of our morning coffee brewing. Catherine frequently visits jazz clubs and attends concerts, always on the lookout for new experiences and fresh perspectives. This year, Catherine was especially excited when she learned about the upcoming jazz festival being held in our city. It wasn't just any festival. It was a major event that would feature some of the most renowned names in jazz. The news of this festival seemed to invigorate her, and she spoke about it with an enthusiasm that I hadn't seen in a while. She meticulously planned her schedule around the festival, marking dates on the calendar and eagerly discussing the lineup with anyone who would listen. As the days drew closer, Catherine's excitement grew palpable. She immersed herself in every detail of the festival, from studying the performance schedules to following the latest updates about the featured artists. Her anticipation was infectious, and I found myself caught up in her enthusiasm, even though my interest in jazz was more casual. The festival promised to be a grand affair, and Catherine was determined to make the most of it. She had purchased tickets for several key performances and made plans to attend various related events. I admired her dedication and enjoyed seeing her so passionate about something she loved so deeply. Little did I know, this festival would be more than just a celebration of music. It would become the backdrop for a series of events that would challenge everything I thought I knew about our lives together. As the jazz festival drew nearer, Catherine's excitement became almost tangible. Every day she would share snippets of information with me about the festival's lineup, eagerly recounting details about the various performers and their scheduled sets. It was clear that this event was more than just another concert for her. It was an experience she had been looking forward to for months. One artist in particular had captured Catherine's attention: George Hunt. George was a renowned jazz musician, celebrated for his virtuoso performances and his unique approach to jazz. Catherine had spoken about him with a sense of reverence, as though meeting him in person was a dream come true. She had followed his career for years, collecting his records and reading every interview she could find. The closer the festival approached, the more Catherine's anticipation grew. She had meticulously studied George Hunt's performance schedule and made sure she had tickets for his sets. She even mentioned that there would be a special meet and greet session with him after one of his performances. The idea of meeting him face to face thrilled her, and she seemed almost giddy at the thought of the encounter. I couldn't help but be caught up in her enthusiasm. Her passion was infectious, and I was happy to see her so excited about something she loved. As she spoke about George Hunt, I could see the sparkle in her eyes and the genuine excitement in her voice. It was a stark contrast to her usual demeanor, and it was clear that this festival was shaping up to be a significant event in her life. She spent hours talking about the details of the meet and greet, imagining what she would say to him and how she hoped to make a memorable impression. Catherine even practiced some of her questions and topics of discussion, eager to make the most of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I admired her dedication and felt a twinge of curiosity about what made George Hunt so special to her. Little did I realize that this intense focus on George Hunt and the festival would soon unravel into something far more complex and challenging than I could have ever anticipated. The excitement of the festival was only the beginning of a journey that would test our relationship in ways we had never imagined. The day of the jazz festival arrived with a crisp, clear sky and a sense of excitement in the air. Catherine was practically buzzing with energy as she prepared for the event. She had spent the morning getting ready, carefully choosing her outfit and making sure she had everything she needed for the day ahead. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I couldn't help but smile at her eagerness. Unfortunately, my work schedule didn't allow me to join her. I had a series of important meetings and deadlines that couldn't be postponed, and as much as I wished I could attend the festival with her, it simply wasn't feasible. Catherine understood, and she reassured me that she would have a fantastic time and that she'd be home late in the evening. As she left for the festival, I watched her go with a mix of admiration and longing. I knew how much this event meant to her, and I hoped she would enjoy every moment. She kissed me goodbye, her eyes sparkling with anticipation, and promised to call me if anything noteworthy happened. The house felt unusually quiet without her, and I found it difficult to concentrate on my work. My thoughts kept drifting to the festival, imagining the vibrant atmosphere and the joy Catherine must be experiencing. I was glad she had this chance to immerse herself in her passion, even if it meant I was missing out. Throughout the day, I received occasional updates from Catherine. She sent me a few text messages describing the energy of the festival and her excitement about the performances. Her words were filled with enthusiasm, and it was clear she was having an unforgettable time. Her messages were accompanied by photos of the festival grounds and glimpses of the crowd, each one a testament to how much she was enjoying herself. As the hours ticked by, I anticipated her return, looking forward to hearing all about her day. I imagined her recounting the highlights of the festival, the moments that made her smile, and the stories she would bring back. I was content knowing she was having a great time, even if I couldn't share in the experience. As the evening wore on, I kept glancing at the clock, waiting for Catherine to come through the door. She had said she would be home late, but as the hours passed, her absence started to weigh heavily on my mind. I tried to push away my growing concern, telling myself that she was just caught up in the festival's excitement. After all, it was a big event, and she might have lost track of time. But as the night deepened, my worry grew. I decided to call her, hoping to hear her voice and reassure myself that everything was fine. I dialed her number, only to be met with the disconcerting sound of her voicemail greeting. I tried again and again, but each call was met with the same result. My concern turned to anxiety when I realized that her phone was now turned off. I tried to keep calm, but the silence of the house seemed to amplify my growing unease. I wondered if she had run into trouble or if something had happened. The festival grounds were far from home, and while she was an adult and capable, the lack of contact left me feeling helpless. I paced the living room, my mind racing through various scenarios. I thought about her friends and the people she was supposed to be with. Surely someone would have noticed if she was missing. I tried to remember if she had mentioned any specific plans for the end of the night, but my memory failed me. The night dragged on, and the initial excitement I had felt for her began to fade, replaced by a gnawing sense of worry. I debated whether to reach out to her friends or the festival organizers, but I hesitated, unsure if I was overreacting. The thought of her being alone and uncontactable made me feel increasingly anxious. I kept my phone close, hoping for a call or a message, but as the hours passed, it became clear that Catherine was not coming home anytime soon. My mind was a whirlwind of concern, and the house, once a haven of comfort, now felt like a space full of unanswered questions and mounting fear. The next morning, as the first light of dawn crept through the window, I was jolted awake by the sound of the front door opening. I rushed downstairs, my heart pounding, and there stood Catherine, looking exhausted but exhilarated. Her eyes sparkled with the same excitement she had carried with her to the festival, and she was practically glowing with the joy of her experiences. She apologized for being so late, explaining that the festival had run longer than she had anticipated. Her face was flushed, and her clothes were slightly disheveled, a testament to the long hours she had spent immersed in the festivities. Despite her weariness, there was a palpable sense of fulfillment about her. As she settled into a chair, I could see that she was eager to share her experiences. She began recounting her adventures from the previous day, her voice animated and full of enthusiasm. Catherine spoke at length about the performances she had witnessed, each description laced with the kind of detail that only someone deeply passionate about jazz could provide. She described the atmosphere of the festival with vivid imagery, the music, and the energy that filled the air. Her eyes lit up when she spoke about George Hunt. She gushed about the intimate, electrifying performance he had delivered, and how it had exceeded her expectations. Catherine had managed to attend a special session where she got to see him up close, and she was still buzzing from the experience. She shared how he had engaged with the audience, how his music had moved her, and how being in his presence had been a dream come true for her. I listened to my initial relief at her safe return, slowly melting into a mixture of confusion and concern. Catherine's excitement was palpable, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease from her prolonged absence. As she continued to talk, her enthusiasm and the spark in her eyes were undeniable, yet I couldn't ignore the lingering worry from the night before. Despite my lingering questions, I tried to focus on her joy and the happiness she derived from the festival. I was glad she had such an amazing experience, but I also felt a need to understand more about her unexpected delay. For now, though, I let her recount her stories, hoping that as the day unfolded, we could address the concerns and move forward from this unsettling night. In the weeks following the jazz festival, Catherine's fascination with jazz seemed to deepen rather than wane. What had begun as a passionate hobby evolved into an almost obsessive interest. Her evenings were now consumed by a relentless pursuit of live music events and jazz-related activities. It started subtly. She would attend a concert here and there, always with the same enthusiasm she had displayed during the festival. But soon, her schedule was filled with back-to-back performances, and it seemed as though every available evening was dedicated to jazz. She eagerly sought out every opportunity to immerse herself in the genre, whether it was a small, intimate club or a grand, prestigious venue. Her dedication was admirable, but it also began to dominate our lives. Catherine would come home late, her mind still buzzing from the music she had just experienced. She would recount the details of each performance with the same fervor, describing every nuance of the musician's techniques and the atmosphere of the venue. While I appreciated her passion, I couldn't help but notice how this new obsession was slowly taking over our evenings and weekends. Our conversations began to revolve solely around jazz, leaving little room for other topics. I found myself struggling to keep up with her schedule, often feeling like a spectator in her world rather than an active participant. Catherine's excitement was palpable, but her single-minded focus on jazz was starting to create a distance between us. I tried to be supportive, attending a few concerts with her and engaging in her conversations about music, but each time I felt more like an outsider looking in. The once enjoyable aspect of our life together was now tinged with a sense of exclusion. It was as though jazz had become a barrier between us, a realm I could not fully enter. Despite my efforts to understand and support her, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Catherine's enthusiasm for jazz had become all-encompassing, and the imbalance in our lives was starting to take its toll. I wondered if her intense interest was a way to escape something else, or if there was more to her newfound obsession than met the eye. As Catherine's jazz obsession continued to dominate her life, I began to notice some troubling changes in her behavior. It started with small things. She was less attentive during our conversations and seemed preoccupied. her mind always drifting back to her latest musical experience. She would often come home later than expected, and when she did, she was usually too exhausted to engage in much conversation. Initially, I attributed her lateness and preoccupation to her deep immersion in jazz. But as time went on, I couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. Catherine's lateness became more frequent, and her explanations for why she was held up started to sound less convincing. She would mention late-night jam sessions, impromptu meetups with fellow enthusiasts, or extended after-parties. But these stories began to ring hollow. I also noticed that her phone was often buzzing with messages and calls from unknown numbers. She would quickly silence it or turn it off, claiming it was just fans or fellow music lovers trying to reach her. Her demeanor had changed. She was more distant and less engaged with me, her responses curt and her interactions mechanical. The more I observed, the more my suspicions grew. Catherine had always been open and transparent with me, but now there were cracks in the facade. She was frequently out of touch, and when she was home, she seemed emotionally and physically drained, as though her energy was being diverted elsewhere. I tried to dismiss my concerns, attributing them to overthinking or stress from my work. However, the pattern of her behavior became harder to ignore. The once enjoyable conversations about jazz had become one-sided, and I found myself increasingly questioning her commitment to our relationship. There was a nagging feeling in the back of my mind, a sense that something wasn't quite right. I started to wonder if her fervent love for jazz was masking something deeper, something she wasn't ready to share with me. The distance between us was growing, and I was left grappling with my suspicions, unsure of how to confront them without causing a rift. The persistent unease gnawed at me, driving me to take action. The more Catherine withdrew, the more determined I became to uncover the truth behind her increasingly erratic behavior. Her constant absences and the secrecy surrounding her phone had become a growing concern. I knew I had to find out for myself what was going on, so one evening I decided to follow her. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. I wrestled with feelings of guilt and apprehension, but my curiosity and worry ultimately overcame my reservations. I waited until Catherine had left for what she claimed would be another late-night jazz event. As she drove away, I followed at a discreet distance, my mind racing with a mix of anticipation and dread. Catherine's route took her across town, leading me through a series of familiar streets and winding roads. I kept my distance, careful not to alert her to my presence. Eventually, we arrived at a part of the city I wasn't as familiar with, an area known for its upscale dining and nightlife. My heart pounded as I watched her park her car and walk towards a charming, dimly lit restaurant with an inviting ambiance. I parked a few blocks away and waited, my thoughts swirling with unanswered questions. The restaurant, an elegant establishment with a classic design, had large windows that allowed a clear view of the interior. I watched as Catherine entered and was greeted warmly by the staff. She appeared relaxed, almost at ease, as she exchanged pleasantries with the maitre d'. I decided to approach cautiously, finding a vantage point across the street where I could see inside without being too conspicuous. The restaurant's interior was bustling with activity, and through the large windows, I caught sight of Catherine seated at a table near the center. My heart sank when I saw George Hunt walking towards her, a broad smile on his face. George Hunt, the same musician Catherine had been so obsessed with, was the focus of her attention. I watched as he joined her at the table, and they engaged in what seemed to be an intimate conversation. The way they leaned toward each other and the ease with which they spoke suggested a closeness that went beyond mere admiration for his music. My mind raced as I observed them sharing a meal. Catherine seemed genuinely thrilled, her laughter mingling with George's as they exchanged stories and enjoyed each other's company. The connection between them was palpable, and it was clear that their interaction was more than just a fan meeting a celebrity. The scene before me painted a picture of an intimate, almost romantic dinner. They were seated closely, and their body language suggested an undeniable chemistry. Catherine's usual spark was in full force, but it wasn't directed towards me. It was directed at George Hunt. As they clinked glasses and shared moments of laughter, the truth began to crystallize. My concerns about her obsession with jazz were suddenly overshadowed by the reality of her emotional investment in someone else. I felt a mix of anger, confusion, and heartache as I watched the evening unfold. The images of Catherine and George together were seared into my memory. each moment adding weight to the suspicions I had tried so hard to ignore. As the night wore on, and they finally left the restaurant together, I remained behind, grappling with the revelation of their relationship and the realization that my wife had been hiding something much deeper than a mere fascination with jazz. With a heavy heart, I drove back home, the images from the evening replaying in my mind. The truth was now unmistakable, and as I faced the silence of our empty house, I knew that the next steps would be fraught with difficult conversations and painful revelations. The revelation of Catherine and George Hunt's intimate dinner left me reeling, but it also spurred me into action. I needed to know more, to understand the full extent of their relationship. So I resolved to keep a close watch on their interactions, hoping to piece together the puzzle of what was happening between them. Over the next few weeks, I observed their meetings with increasing frequency. Catherine's schedule had become predictable. Her evenings and weekends were consistently marked by outings that, while ostensibly related to jazz, often involved George Hunt. It was clear that their connection was not limited to professional admiration, but had grown into something far more personal. I found myself following her more frequently, each time growing more disturbed by the nature of their encounters. They would meet at various upscale venues, each time seeming more at ease and connected than the last. Whether it was a cozy jazz club, an elegant restaurant, or a private event, their time together was marked by an intimacy that went beyond mere friendship. Their interactions were increasingly affectionate. I noticed the way George would gently touch Catherine's arm or lean in close when they spoke. The subtle glances they exchanged and the private jokes they shared painted a picture of a deepening relationship. It wasn't just the physical proximity that struck me, but the emotional bond they seemed to share. Catherine's laughter was lighter, her demeanor more relaxed, and her eyes shone with a light that was absent when she was with me. At first, I tried to rationalize their meetings. Maybe they were just close friends sharing a passion for jazz. But as the weeks went on, the evidence became undeniable. Catherine would often return home late, her demeanor somewhat distracted, and her phone conversations with George seemed to be conducted with a sense of familiarity that went beyond casual. I even overheard snippets of their conversations, catching phrases and terms that suggested a deeper level of intimacy. The way they spoke of each other was not just as fans or colleagues, but as partners who understood and complemented one another. It was clear that their connection was something more than what I had initially suspected. The more I observed, the more I understood that Catherine's relationship with George Hunt had evolved into a full-blown affair. Their time together was filled with shared experiences and emotional exchanges that underscored the growing depth of their bond. I watched as they would often leave together, their closeness evident in the way they interacted and the way they seemed completely absorbed in each other's presence. This growing realization was both painful and disorienting. The facade of Catherine's jazz obsession had now peeled away to reveal a far more troubling reality. Her frequent absences and the nature of her interactions with George painted a stark picture of infidelity. I struggled to reconcile the vibrant, loving woman I had known with the person I was now watching from the shadows. The contrast between my life with Catherine and the scenes I witnessed was jarring. Our once shared moments and the connection we had seemed distant and blurred, overshadowed by the intimacy she now shared with someone else. As I continued to follow their interactions, I felt increasingly isolated and heartbroken, grappling with the painful truth that the woman I loved was emotionally entangled with another man. The growing weight of the evidence had been heavy on my mind, and I knew I needed to find concrete proof to understand the full scope of Catherine's betrayal. My suspicions were confirmed as I discovered something that would change everything: clear, undeniable evidence of her affair with George Hunt. The opportunity came one evening when Catherine left her phone unattended on the kitchen counter while she took a quick call. I had been hesitant to invade her privacy, but the mounting evidence had left me with little choice. With a deep breath, I picked up her phone and unlocked it, guided by a mix of fear and resolve. The screen revealed a flood of messages and emails, each one painting a detailed picture of Catherine's relationship with George. The text messages were a startling revelation. They ranged from affectionate exchanges to explicit plans for future meetings. Catherine's words were filled with endearments and references to private moments they had shared. The tone of their conversations suggested a deep emotional and physical connection, one that had developed into a full-blown affair. The messages included detailed plans for future rendezvous, often referring to intimate experiences and future intentions. The email thread was even more revealing. Catherine and George had been communicating regularly, discussing not just their meetings but also their future together. The emails contained plans for a trip abroad, something Catherine had never mentioned to me. They spoke of exotic locations, and their correspondence was filled with excitement about their upcoming escape. The details were explicit. They planned to leave in a few weeks, intending to spend an extended period together, exploring new cities and experiences. One particular email stood out, where Catherine discussed the logistics of their trip with George, mentioning how they would handle their respective responsibilities and the arrangements they were making. Her words conveyed a sense of commitment to this escape, emphasizing how excited she was about the prospect of their time together. As I read through these messages and emails, the full extent of her betrayal became painfully clear. Catherine was not just having a fleeting affair, she had been planning a significant departure with George, a move that would fundamentally alter our lives. The realization that she had been making such elaborate plans behind my back was crushing. I felt a mix of anger, sorrow, and disbelief as I absorbed the details. The evidence was undeniable, and the depth of Catherine's involvement with George was far greater than I'd imagined. The betrayal was not just emotional, but also involved a tangible future that they were building together. With a heavy heart, I put the phone back where I found it, my mind racing with the implications of what I had discovered. The plans for their departure, the intimacy of their messages, and the promises they had made to each other painted a stark picture of the relationship they had cultivated. I now faced the daunting task of confronting Catherine with the evidence, knowing that the conversation would be a turning point in our lives. The future of our relationship was uncertain, and the path ahead seemed fraught with pain and difficult decisions. The weight of the evidence had been a heavy burden on my shoulders, and I knew it was time to confront Catherine with the truth. The realization of her betrayal and the elaborate plans she had made with George Hunt left me feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal. I could no longer live with the knowledge of her deceit without addressing it directly. That evening, as Catherine walked through the door, I knew I had to act. I had gathered all the evidence, texts, emails, and details of their planned escape, and had them laid out in front of me. I waited for her to settle in, my mind racing with the words I needed to say. When she finally joined me in the living room, I took a deep breath and began. "Catherine, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "I've discovered something that I can't ignore anymore." Her face shifted from a casual expression to one of concern as she sensed the gravity in my tone. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice tinged with a hint of unease. I took a moment to collect my thoughts before I continued. "I know about your affair with George Hunt," I said, pulling out the phone and showing her the messages and emails. "I've seen the plans you've made with him, the way you've been hiding things from me. I know you're planning to leave with him, to start a new life together." Catherine's face went pale as she took in the evidence before her. I watched as the realization of being caught fully sank in. She remained silent for a moment, struggling to find the right words. Catherine finally looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of resignation and sadness. "James," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I'm so sorry. I never meant for things to get this far." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I've been having an affair with George for a while now. I never wanted to hurt you, but I felt so unhappy in our marriage. I felt like something was missing, and George, he made me feel alive again." Her confession was like a punch to the gut, each word echoing the pain I felt. Catherine's voice wavered as she spoke about her feelings for George. "I was searching for something new, something that could give me a fresh start. I thought that if I could be with George, I might find the happiness that seemed to be slipping away from me." Tears welled up in her eyes as she continued. "I never wanted to hurt you, James. I've been so unhappy for a long time, and I made a terrible mistake trying to find solace elsewhere. I realize now that I should have addressed my feelings with you, but instead, I let it spiral out of control." Her words were filled with regret, but they did little to ease the pain I was feeling. Catherine's admission of her unhappiness and her desire for a new beginning with George was a bitter pill to swallow. It was clear that her decision to leave was not impulsive, but rather a result of deep-seated issues that had been brewing for some time. As I absorbed her confession, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a profound sense of betrayal. The future of our relationship now hung in the balance, and the path ahead seemed uncertain. Confronting Catherine had revealed the depth of her feelings and the extent of her plans, but it had also opened the door to difficult conversations and painful decisions about what would come next. The confrontation with Catherine had left us both emotionally drained, and the gravity of our situation began to settle in. The revelations and admissions had opened a floodgate of feelings and questions that needed to be addressed. We were both aware that our relationship was at a crossroads, and it was time to face the consequences of the choices we had made. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the room heavy with silence. The evidence of Catherine's betrayal lay between us, a painful reminder of the breach in our trust. I could see the struggle in Catherine's eyes as she tried to find the right words to express her thoughts. Her earlier confession had been raw and heartfelt, but the real work now was to navigate the aftermath. "I think we need to talk about what happens next," Catherine said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "This has been so overwhelming for both of us, and I need to figure out where I stand. I need time to understand my feelings and what I want." Her words were a stark reminder of the emotional distance that had grown between us. The pain of her betrayal was still fresh, and the future of our relationship seemed uncertain. I nodded, my heart heavy with the weight of the decision we faced. "I agree," I said. "We both need time to process everything. I don't want us to make any rash decisions right now." Catherine's eyes were filled with sadness as she continued. "I'm going to stay with a friend for a while. I need to be away from this environment to clear my head and figure out my next steps. It's not that I'm abandoning you, but I think it's important for both of us to have some space." The idea of her leaving was painful, but I understood her need for distance. It was clear that the situation required time and space for both of us to reflect and come to terms with what had happened. The emotional turmoil was too great for us to continue living together under these circumstances. "I'll respect your need for space," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I hope that this time apart will help us both gain some clarity about what we want and need." As we began to discuss the logistics of her temporary departure, we talked about practicalities, how to handle our shared responsibilities, the division of our belongings, and how we would communicate during this period. The conversation was measured and respectful, a stark contrast to the emotional intensity of our earlier discussion. The decision to separate, even temporarily, was a difficult one. It marked a significant turning point in our relationship, a moment where we had to confront the reality of our situation and the possibility that our future together might look very different from the life we had once envisioned. The time apart would give us both the opportunity to reflect on our feelings, our needs, and the potential paths forward. As Catherine prepared to leave, there was a sense of finality in the air. The future was uncertain, and while we both hoped for resolution and understanding, we were also facing the possibility that our time apart might lead us to different conclusions about our relationship. The coming weeks would be a period of introspection and soul-searching, and the outcome remained unknown. The days that followed Catherine's departure were a profound period of solitude and reflection. The house, once filled with the warmth of shared routines and laughter, now felt empty and silent. The absence of her presence was a constant reminder of the reality I was now facing, a reality where Catherine was no longer a part of my daily life. I spent the initial days in a haze, grappling with the overwhelming emotions of sadness, anger, and confusion. The weight of the betrayal and the pain of seeing the life we had built together unravel was almost too much to bear. The house, with its quiet rooms and untouched spaces, became a physical representation of the void left by her departure. To regain some sense of normalcy, I began to focus on the practical aspects of my life that had been put on hold. I started by organizing the house, sorting through belongings that had been shared, and making decisions about what to keep and what to let go. The process was both cathartic and painful, as it involved confronting the memories of our time together and acknowledging the changes that had occurred. I also sought solace in activities that had once brought me joy, but had been overshadowed by the turmoil of recent events. I reconnected with old hobbies, took long walks to clear my mind, and reached out to friends and family for support. Their encouragement and understanding were invaluable during this period, offering a sense of connection and grounding that helped me navigate the emotional upheaval. The process of moving forward involved a great deal of self-reflection. I spent many hours pondering what had led to this point, examining my role in our relationship and the dynamics that had contributed to the breakdown. It was a time of deep introspection where I had to confront uncomfortable truths and come to terms with the fact that our marriage was irrevocably changed. I also sought professional help to assist with the emotional aspects of this transition. Therapy provided a safe space to explore my feelings, understand my reactions, and develop strategies for coping with the loss. It was an important step in processing the grief and finding a path toward healing. As the weeks turned into months, I began to adjust to the new reality of life without Catherine. The initial shock and pain gradually gave way to a sense of acceptance. I learned to navigate the world on my own, finding new routines and discovering aspects of myself that had been obscured by the demands of the relationship. The journey of rebuilding my life was not easy, and it was marked by moments of doubt and struggle. However, I found strength in the gradual process of acceptance and self-discovery. I realized that while Catherine's departure had been a painful upheaval, it also opened the door to new possibilities and opportunities for personal growth. The future remained uncertain, but I approached it with a renewed sense of hope and resilience. The experience had reshaped my perspective, and while the scars of betrayal would always be a part of me, they also served as a testament to my ability to endure and move forward. In this new chapter of my life, I sought to embrace the lessons learned and build a future that honored my journey and the person I had become.